August 27th is the feast day of Saint Monica. And we know that she is the mother of the famous Saint Augustine, and that she prayed and interceded for 17 years leading up to her son's conversion. And so she gives so many of us hope who have wayward children. She is the go-to saint. She totally understands that fear that a son or daughter would be lost for all eternity. And she took her job as a mother very seriously in this regard. And she also dreamed that the Lord was showing her that she was intertwined with his conversion and that she needed to be involved in his life, even though he didn't want her to be involved in his life before his conversion. But what we don't know about Monica is some of the backstory, and it's really fascinating. And I think that it will give a lot of us inspiration. So there was a maidservant in her home when she was growing up as a little girl. And this maidservant was elderly. She was really old. She had been a maidservant for her father when he was growing up too. And she had lived in the time of the severe Christian persecutions in the Roman Empire, because in Monica's time, let's see, she was born around 330 and she lived 56 years. So she's right in the middle of the 4th century. But prior to that, when this maidservant was younger, she had seen her friends die and had lived through that persecution and remained a faithful Christian. So as Monica's growing up, she did tell her the faith, share it with her, and Monica was a committed Christian. Now, in those days, women, girls really, were married very young. And her father, I don't know why he did this, but he married her to a pagan, Patricius. And she had to go live with him in his family, with his mother and his father at first. And they were not Christian. They did not approve of her practicing her faith, even though she did it anyway. But eventually she won them over. And eventually she and Patricius had their own household, and they had 3 children. Augustine was the oldest, 2 boys and a girl. So this is their family life. But he, being a pagan and just not good husband material, he was unfaithful. If he was drinking too much, he would beat her or get violent. They weren't well enough off to offer Augustine a higher education. And so he did procure a sponsor for Augustine so that he could go away for 5 years and be trained in rhetoric. And so he leaves his home when he's 17. And he goes and he gets educated in the ways of the world, we should say. And while he's gone, his father dies. But this is another part of the story. A year before Patricius dies, he converts to Christianity as well. And so Monica and he have what we believe, a pretty good marriage that last year of his life, and then he died. The evidence we have that it was a good marriage is that she made it very clear at that time that she would want to be buried next to him. And so that's not what somebody who has just escaped an abusive situation wants or says. After 5 years of being away, Augustine returned educated and with a son and a girlfriend. The son is illegitimate because he didn't marry the girl, but he keeps her. They're together. They're a unit. And so Monica, you can imagine, she's a Christian. Do I let these people live in my house? You know, they're living in sin. But I'm sure that her grandson kind of won her over, you know, and she lets them into the house. And then Augustine, who has been away, he has left his Christian faith. He's adopted something called Manichaeism. And his younger siblings, who are now teenagers and not out on their own quite yet, he starts trying to convert them. And so then she has to kick him out. So he and the girlfriend and the grandson have to leave because she will not have this. You know, she's still got 2 children to finish raising, and Patricius is dead. And so she has to make him leave. And then remember I told you about that dream? She had a dream that she was involved in Augustine's conversion somehow, and she felt that the Lord was saying, stick close to him. There's a plan here. So because of that dream, she lets them back into the home. But I am sure from having read about her that she forbade him to speak about Manichaeism to her other children. Anyway, he decides that Thagast, which is the northern African town that they live in, it's become boring for him. He's very full of himself, and he's been educated in rhetoric, and no one can out-argue him and blah, blah, blah. But he just like, this little podunk town, I've got to get out of here. I got to go to Rome, And so he plans to move to Rome. By the time this happened, her other children, who were older teens, were now settled into their lives. And they're Christian, and she's not worried about them. So she is free to go. She convinces Augustine to take her with him and his girlfriend and her grandson to Rome. And he agrees. So they travel to a port city in North Africa. And so now they're there. And he does this very cruel thing. And I don't know why he did this cruel thing, but he convinces her, she doesn't want to, but he convinces her that she would really be happy staying at a chapel to Blessed Cyprian, to stay there overnight and pray there, that's where she would love to be. And so she agrees. And he tells her, I have a friend, and we're going to set sail when the wind is right. So that should be in the morning. I will come and get you, and then we'll sail. Well, what happens is that while she's at the chapel, he sails off with his girlfriend and his son, and he doesn't tell her. And so here she is the next day. She's looking to find him, and then she discovers that he's already gone. She's in a strange city in 4th century Roman Empire, Northern Africa. A woman alone, not young and not with power of any kind or status. And there she is. And you would think that she would go home to Thagast, which, return home to Thagast. But really, she had had that dream, and it really convinced her. She was sure that the Lord had her involved somehow with the conversion of her son, Augustine. So what does she do? I don't know how long it takes her, but she arranges for passage to go sail to Rome after him. Now, in those days, there were not passenger ships. If you wanted to get on a ship, you had to find someone with a cargo ship, and you were part of the cargo. And it was really often unsanitary conditions and really hard conditions. But I will tell you this happened to her. She did get passage, and during the passage, there was this big storm, and the hands on deck, they really thought that they would perish. And they came to her for support and solace and for her faith, because she was very sure she was supposed to be on that ship, and she was supposed to go to Rome, and she was supposed to find her son. And she was so sure of it that they gathered courage from her faith that this was all going to work out fine. And it's interesting too, because remember I told you she was when she was first married, living with her husband's family and all that. Neighbors got to know her. And when they would have disputes and things, they would ask her to help them settle it. They knew she wouldn't participate in gossip, and that her reputation and her conduct was above reproach, and it was wise. And it came out of that Christian belief that she learned from that maidservant who had lived during the hardest times of persecution and had lost many people. That old maidservant, I think about that old maidservant, if she only knew how the future would be impacted, because she took the time to make sure that this little girl growing up knew about the Christian faith and knew it as only someone who witnessed the martyrs could know it. Anyway, back to the story. So she sails after him. By the time she gets to Rome, she finds out he's gone on. He's gone on to Milan. Rome, the students were paying him enough or whatever, and he decides he's got to move on. So he moves on with the girlfriend and his son. A lot of time is going by. Anyway, she gets to Milan, and so what does she do? She just gets in with the Christians there, her community. And there's persecutions there, mild by comparison of her maidservant, the old maidservant, but there was persecutions there too. The bishop Ambrose was having trouble with the local authorities, and there was some serious stuff going on. But then when she gets in with this group of Christians and she meets Bishop Ambrose, she knows now her son, who was a prodigy, here is someone who can go toe to toe with him and win him over. And she recognized it and she knew it. And she was pestering him. Now, think about it. How often do we pester and try to orchestrate how God's going to work? I mean, he may have asked us to do it like he did her, asked us to be involved or to pray or whatever, but we take on more than is ours to take on. Well, this is from Augustine's Confessions. He, Ambrose, became annoyed with her persistent entreaty and said to her, "Go on your way and continue your life." So she did. She continued her life. She kind of let go of it at this point. "Continue your life of prayer, for it cannot be that the son of such tears should perish." And I will tell you also something he said to her. He did say to her, talk less to Augustine about God and more to God about Augustine. In other words, your intercessory prayer, instead of pestering someone. So how many of us try to take control of things? Just, it's what we do because we see something good that should happen and we think it's our job to do it, when in fact, we need to ask the Lord, what is our part to play in this? And just play the part we're given, not overstep our bounds. So anyway, we kind of know how the story ends. Augustine is finally converted. He doesn't want to, he resists because he knows it's the truth, but he doesn't want to give up his life of sin. And so finally he's converted. And then the first thing he does is tell his mother, You can read all about it in the Confessions. He really has a great relationship with her. She doesn't live too much longer after that. And she tells her sons, both her sons are there when she's dying, and that they said, well, we're going to take you back to Tagaste and bury you next to your husband. And she's like, no, just remember me at the altar. In other words, pray for me at Mass. God answered her prayers far more than what she asked. And I think that's the beauty of having waited so long. I think about that. Jesus is that way. Recently we had a reading about the Samaritan woman who wants her daughter to be freed from a demon. And Jesus at first ignores her, and then he calls her a dog. He says it's not right to give the food of the children to the dogs. And he keeps putting her off. And it's funny. Jesus puts us off just because he can't wait to give us what we want. He loves to see our faith. And the more we pray, the more we demonstrate that faith. And St. Monica surely did. St. Monica, pray for us.